Welcome back to TNT. Thank you for joining us once again at yet another video on marriage, narcissistic abuse, knowing who you are in Christ, setting boundaries, and a whole lot more. We talked briefly about boundaries, and then we talked about knowing who you are in Christ, knowing your identity, and how that is really the only way to counter narcissism. Sarah, my friend here, who has so graciously chosen to share her story with us.
Grateful.
She's had many a tearful moment in our previous video. And it was not when she talked about the wrongdoing, but it was when she talked about the moment when she embraced and got a hold of her identity in Christ. And I pray that you may have that moment. As we move forward now in this video, we'd like to talk some more about narcissism, narcissistic abuse, narcissistic personality disorder, gaslighting, words that just get thrown at you without context. They mean nothing. They just mean what the dictionary says they mean.
Yeah.
So we'll have Sarah here share a little more of her story and touch on the subject of narcissism.
Thank you. As far as narcissism, I would say that really through my marriage before and even in life in general, I always had a little bit of a naivety spirit about me. So, and like I said before, I was always a very accommodating person. I would never want to hurt you, to think that I hurt you and caused you to be angry or sad would literally just cut to my core because that's not who I am. So the downside of that, and also piggyback riding on the boundaries, I would never do that. And I think that once I really realized my true value and worth in Christ as a woman, as his daughter, who he created me for a specific purpose, realizing that it was okay. He needs me to have boundaries. He needs me to set that. So once I was going through my divorce proceedings of, a marriage of over 24 years, and I would go into counseling and, talk about different things that had happened, because some things can be traumatizing, definitely emotionally.
Absolutely.
And not understanding things like, we're both Christians, we both believe in God. I think that what happens is that I kind of thought that, well, you're the head of the household, so I have to be submissive in this way. So I didn't recognize narcissism as narcissism. Some of the situations that I would explain to my counselor that I would be working through, they would say, well, that's narcissistic behavior. And they would say it. And then I'm defending my husband, like, no, that is not him. He is not narcissistic at all. You have this totally wrong,
Right.
Maybe I described something wrong. Maybe I mistook it for what it was. So here I am. I'm taking ownership of that behavior. Well, then they would say, a lot of times with narcissistic behavior, they can be the life of the party.
Oh, absolutely.
Everybody wants them to come to the party.
There's a
because
huge
they are
charming side to them.
Very charming, the life of the party, very outgoing, friendly. And so it would be a couple things. And she would say to me, she's like, okay, so you had a nice conversation yesterday. And I was like, yeah. Well, how have the past few days been? Well, not too bad. We kind of had this really big argument, and then she noticed the pattern. And she's like, narcissistic behavior it's like stroke,
slap,
punch in the face. And then that was like a light bulb moment for me. I was like, oh my gosh. And part of me didn't want to admit that because I'm not saying he was a bad guy,
right? Because you remember the strokes.
Yes.
And even when you remember the punch in the face, you think, that was just a little moment. And maybe it was me.
Yeah, he must have just had a bad day. It's okay. He just had a bad day. That's was just an instance, but once I was aware of that, I started noticing it more and more and more. And I was like, wow. So it was like at that moment I had to, during that time, that's when God truly, got through my head and my heart, my value in him. and that he expected me to be able to stand up for myself.
Mm-hmm.
So I had to practice. And I remember, having to say something to him that I knew he wasn't going to like what I had to say.
Right.
So the fear of that anticipation would always stifle me to keep me from not speaking my heart or my mind.
Absolutely. Avoiding conflict.
Absolutely. That is me to a T, avoiding conflict. But I remember that, it was just like, Sarah, you have to do this.
Mm-hmm.
You have to do it. It doesn't mean that you're saying he's the worst person on the face of the earth.
Mm-hmm.
This is about who you are and what you're going to allow to either continue in your life from here forward, or now's your opportunity to learn from all of this and do an about face and change the direction of who you are and what you will allow in your life.
That's right.
And so with that being said, the first time I had to say something, I remember literally shaking because I knew the anticipation. This is not going well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm preparing myself for the outcome. And it wasn't anything hateful or hurtful. It was just stating a fact. No, this is not what I'm going to do. This is what I'm going to do. And once I did that and got the words out, it gave me a sense of power, so to speak, and a little bit of confidence. So the next time that I had to do something like that, I had a little bit more confidence in myself that I would be able to do that and that I can take the blow.
Right.
So that was a gradual process, but I'm telling you, it was life-changing for me, because then they knew, okay, wait a minute, she's not going to allow me to do this anymore.
That's right.
I got to a point to where I told my husband that I promise you will divorce a different Sarah than you married.
Good for you.
Yes.
Good for you, because I truly believe, well, you can tell me if you believe this looking back. Had this Sarah, the one who stood up now 20 some years later, had this been the Sarah that married him, who recognized narcissism for what it is, and and recognized who she was in context of narcissism especially, and set those boundaries from day one, would you have had a different outcome?
Oh, I'm sure I would have, and of course, growing up in the era that I did, it was just I think I come from more of a legalistic side, bordering on my ex would definitely tell you I was a very judgmental person. And it's so funny because looking back now, I can see where I was, and it was the way I was raised, although it was in a Christian home, but I can see now where some things were that, I could have done differently. And going through the divorce and learning all these different things, I think it's very important that when you're going through whatever it is that you're going through, I know a friend told me once, yes, you're going to cry. It's going to be hurtful. It is going to be trauma. But God trusts you with this.
Yes.
He trusts you, just like with Job, that when you get to the end of it, you're still giving him all the glory and all the praise for it, although it might not be what you thought it was going to be. It's almost like you have to grieve what you thought you were going to have.
Oh, you do. You absolutely do. I mean, I come from two different perspectives. One is widowhood and one is narcissistic abuse. And in widowhood, in fact, I just wrote about this yesterday. In widowhood, you grieve what you would have continued to have today if you hadn't lost your spouse. In narcissistic abuse, you grieve what you thought it was going to be from the beginning, what you believed that it was part of God's design for your marriage. And you watch that strip away every day on a daily basis, and you grieve every day as you watch it deteriorate and deteriorate because of choices being made. Because your perception of what marriage should be is very different than the perception of the person you married. Now, I did say to you, had you set boundaries and knew your identity at the very beginning, you would have had a different outcome. I just want to elaborate on that and clarify what that outcome could be. It doesn't always necessarily mean that, oh, Sarah would have had a beautiful marriage, everything would have been perfect, and she would not have been divorced. That is a possibility. But for that to happen, her narcissistic spouse would have to surrender his right to be a narcissist, or stop embracing the pleasure that he gets from being a narcissist. And that does not happen easily because they enjoy it far too much. But could it have happened, had this person submitted his life to the Lordship of Christ and not declared himself the Lord over his own life, then it is possible that Sarah and he could have had a godly marriage as long as you're every day working through the steps of surrendering and recognizing that your primary submission is to the Lord, not to each other.
Right.
Not even to your spouse. Your primary submission is to him. If he's leading you on a path that is contrary to where God is leading you, then you're submitting to the wrong ideal, because you still have to submit to biblical values at all point in time. And it's so difficult when you have to deal with this on a daily basis.
It is.
It's very difficult. Your mind, you get decision fatigue in marriage with the narcissist.
Yes.
You totally get decision fatigue because you have to stop and think, should I say what I want to say right now? How's it going to go?
Exactly.
Should I say dinner's ready? Because maybe I've just forgotten to reheat the mashed potatoes, and I'll have to pay the price for declaring dinner's ready when it'll still take me 2 minutes to heat up the mashed potatoes.
Yeah.
There's just all these little things that you don't know goes on in a narcissistic marriage that makes you exhausted of having to process your decisions, process, is this safe for me to do? Is this good for me to do? And so while we talk about boundaries, it's not always easy to set them up in a narcissistic marriage.
No.
You may want to, but you know there's a price to be paid. You know there will be consequences, and you've got to contemplate what is easier to do right now. It's just a whole lot easier to say, okay, yes, it was my fault. Okay, right, you were right, I was wrong. Can we move on? And oftentimes you can move on if you just get to that place, but it wears you out, and over and over and over again, you will be required to take responsibility for everything.
Absolutely.
And if you think that's going to save your marriage or whatever version of a marriage that might be, it doesn't. Because you will still have to take responsibility for the affairs, for anything else that this person does, because in their minds, everything is acceptable. Oddly enough, they even believe that God is okay with their choices, because somewhere within them they say, God made me this way. I'm made different. He knows I have to do things differently. My favorite line in all of this, which blows my mind, is if I have legitimate needs that have to be met illegitimately, that's okay, because they're my legitimate needs.
Yeah. Wow.
So, you know what? It's the narcissist is Lord over his life, and he lords it over yours. You can learn more about the subject. We've done several videos on TNT right here that touch about the subject. You can also go to our website and our Facebook page and read. I've written extensively. We can't go through the details of every nuance, but I need you to know that narcissism is much more than just a word in the dictionary that describes a person who loves themselves. Truth is, a narcissist deep down inside does not love himself, because he knows how wrong and how rotten in many ways his ways of thinking are, and how destructive to his own life.
Yeah.
Even if he's totally clueless as to the destruction in everybody else's life, he is fully aware that over and over and over again, he's destroying his own life. But the classic definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over again, expecting different results. And a narcissist will do that over and over and over again, no matter how many times he's been given an opportunity to change that.
And I feel to add to that with narcissistic behavior, and not just, saying it's just men, because there are women out there too. So I always try to feel like I got to give the guys a little, a little
We
plug
speak
over here.
from the perspective of women.
Of women, exactly.
Right.
But I felt like some of that behavior was due to overcompensating an area in his life that he didn't feel fulfilled in.
Absolutely.
So it was coming from a place of him not knowing his identity in Christ,
and insecurity.
him not knowing his worth and his true
That's
value.
Right. Absolutely.
You know, feeling like, you know, I can't do this, so I have to make myself be bigger than what I am. Because I would always say, why are you not happy with what you've accomplished?
No.
How can you not be happy with that?
There's always the next hill to climb.
Why do you have to, you know, blow it way out of proportion to puff it up? Because then it's not believable at all. But in their mind, that's what makes them feel their value and worth.
Yes, and they spend a lot of time fabricating stuff to just make something look a whole lot bigger and better than it really is.
Yeah.
You know what I'm talking about, and I know what I'm talking about.
I do.
And I hope you never get to find out what we're talking about.
Yeah.
So with that, we will say goodbye to you on this particular episode of our series. And we will talk now about what it takes to survive narcissistic abuse in a marriage that has fallen apart, largely because of narcissism. So thank you for joining us, and we will see you at our next video, in which we will talk about forgiveness.